Well, hi there and welcome back to the Drawing Database. Professor Marc Leone. And today we've got an interesting topic. We're going to look at the lithographic educational plates of Charles Bargue. He's a French painter and a lithographer, and he's widely known for an influential drawing system developed in the 19th century. He's French. He was born in 1826 and died also in 1883. And he also worked with a well-known artist, what you could call the realist, if you will, Jean-Léon Jerome. So Charles Bargue and Jean-Léon Jerome are the two influential artists that developed this particular system. We call it the Charles Bargue plates, if you will. And what you see within the drawing is you get a good idea of what or how they approach drawing. We call it sight sizing. So you might have heard that before. Sight sizing. It's a measuring type of system in a drawing that you allow yourself to measure something at the same relative distance to you by using string and applying these measurements to the actual drawing. So no matter where the object is in relationship to you, you'll be measuring, and that height of where the object is in relation to you as you look to it will be transferred to your paper. So depending on the size of the object and your paper, it could be very large or very small, or you could move the object, like in this case a plaster cast head, very far away, so it would be smaller on the paper. There's limitations to this particular drawing technique. I don't use it in my teaching practice. As a matter of fact, I've never used it in my artistic practice, but I think it is an interesting idiosyncratic proclivity of art history, and especially drawing art history, that I think everyone should be aware of it and try to at least practice it a little bit. We do slightly here at NKU with another professor. Professor Minty does that a little bit as well. It's a little stiff. It's a little, I think, slow, but it can build confidence in those who need some more measuring or kind of two-dimensional kind of help. So we see here the idea here, the cast is on the right side, and so this is what we're going for. We add all of our value to that. The drawing on the left it's kind of like IKEA. Those of you that have IKEA furniture know about it. It's more diagrammatic. So the image to the left shows you how to get the initial structure down and then get to the right as you block in, shadow shape in pattern and render this to a completion. So you have to know more about light value, right light value, edges, and contrasts. But to get there is this linear, more analytical measuring kind of approach. So the idea would be to set up an object some distance away from you from your easel, and the easel needs to be straight up and 90 degrees or parallel, or I guess perpendicular, to the floor. And then you'll need some string, and you'll want to measure these distances and transfer each distance, for instance, like this line, as you measure it in your drawing, transfer it to your actual lay-in. And then you'll be on your way once you get the actual angle. So it's a very angular kind of methodology that you transfer over. Then once you get the drawing completed, and of course these could be done at home without objects to get the system down first. Van Gogh used this for a time. I believe Picasso was aware of it at times. So it did influence some artists of particular strong note, and then other perhaps lesser artists, art historically speaking, as well. Then once you transfer the drawing over, and then you finish the rendering exactly as it is. So it's a very kind of two-dimensional way to get about to three-dimensionality, and the goal is to sight size your way to getting to three-dimensional objects, and then you have the system kind of down pat. What I teach is a Renaissance, more constructive methodology developed from really after the Gothic age or spirit with Giotto into the early Renaissance, middle, and then the late high Renaissance, Michelangelo and Leonardo, Raphael, and so on in that particular methodology. It lends itself for more varied applications. This one is a more representational only methodology. I suppose two-dimensional photography as well, but it certainly has its limitations, especially with gesture and also especially with imaginative kinds of drawings. Let's go on to the next plate. And here you see a plate of how to get to a hand. And so we see the top drawing is the linear aspect, right? And then the bottom drawing is the value aspect, and it's limited to mostly form and cast shadow together. So a much simplified value scale, so it's much starker in its light source. Notice the light source kind of coming from sort of the bottom and through here. So the idea again is to sight size, get your measurements, and angle your way down. Notice it's very flat. It's still very linear. It's got a little overlapping that gives us some three-dimensionality with the kind of the pestle here and the arm laid over. You can see the volumetric figure coming through, but it's a very non-fussy kind of drawing, very slow and methodical, and it's another particular again approach. And then you take again this drawing here and you apply it to the using value here, and generally it's a good system to copy from to get yourself introduced into drawing. And here we have a sight sizing technique. I believe this torso is from Picasso at probably 14 or 15, a young-ish teenager. And we see again how we get there. Notice the direct center line, the horizontals, the measuring of the angle. So we take great effect with axis lines to get this straight across, to notice the slight tilt of the oblique muscles, and then of course the buttock, or underneath the sacrum at that tilt. So this information is important to get a change between these two, and then of course we go to a slight, looks like a very slight 2-point perspective on the pedestal. And then of course again, notice how we have the shadow shapes that are directly angled off. This is a nice technique in any of the drawing techniques you use, whether it's a Renaissance constructive methodology, which is what I teach, or sight sizing, where again look how the shadow shape is greatly simplified and then laid in, and then of course the finish can be, notice the subtle values on the side here from the core shadow, and then over to the light form shadow up above and through. So it's a good study too. It does produce really nice accuracy, but it's incredibly slow. But I think the idea is to help beginning drawing people, and then if you want to continue this methodology, you can, and then you might have enough information to begin to switch over to a more constructive technique that gives you, I think, more power with a little bit more expressive leeway, right, even in very academic kinds of approaches. Here we see a plaster cast from antiquity. And again, Jerome did these drawings, generally with Barque. Barque was the designer of the program, and Jerome did the complete lithographic plate. So these were drawn actually on stone and developed as lithographs so they could reproduce these. This is probably plate 54 we see up here. Again, we see the angular construction of the three-dimensional object. We get the relative measuring of the planes, a very nice, simple and clean line that can be adjusted through erasing if that is desired, or if the effect of the drawing is, or the measurements are simply wrong, they can be certainly erased. And of course, once we get all of the analytical parts to the whole here, we can begin rendering in charcoal, very fine charcoal pencils and or sticks that are very sharpened and very elongated, pencils with long tips to render the side or at the tip, and you get this very, very smooth kind of finish. And again, these were lithographs, but we can also reproduce this image in charcoal or even graphite too, if you want. So this is your first time seeing the Barque plates. They're fairly well known, mostly. Certainly among professionals, but amateurs like to use them as well. And you can buy the entire Barque plates in the book and practice those. So that is a possibility. I think it's a couple of $100s, which seems like a pretty good value. And I think if you go through the entire system, I think you'll find that you'll have some some better drawing acumen. You're going to need some help learning how to render light value edges and contrast, and I can come in there and certainly with my videos and help you if you like this, because the idea is to take again this very flat idea and give it over here more three-dimensionality as we come across and around. So again, it's a way to understand the complex world of objects in three-dimensional space in a more flat methodology, and it's your job to come and to give this more a stronger three-dimensional effect with light value edges and contrasts. So I thought it might be valuable to show you what's going on, what I talked about a little bit earlier now to reinforce that. So here we have a student here, that could be you, and we have a rope or a pencil for measuring. We see the student some distance away. Let's say that's six feet, or maybe 8 feet away. So we have the object placed. You can see here to here that the object, the plaster cast, is placed relatively at the same distance of the paper. So the height of the object will be transferred directly to the paper. Now, if this object was pushed further back, let's say another 3 feet away from the drawing board, it would be here. So he would be then 11 feet away, okay? And then if the object was over here, its height would be transferred still here. It would just be smaller on the paper. Maybe it would be about this size. So it depends on the size of the object and how far or how close or near it is to you. The only problem here, as the object, if you want to make the object bigger, you're going to need much bigger paper. And what happens if you want to make the object really large, larger than you are in its spatial distance from you? You're going to have to set the image behind you, and that doesn't make much sense in terms of observation. So there really are some limitations there, if you can understand that. Then once you start transferring your measurements over with string and or your pencil laid out with your elbow flexed and tightly flexed and consistent, you can then begin your angular interpretation of the object. Let's go on to the next paper here and take a look at that. I'll just keep it here. And then we see here a more normative view from the side here. We see the artist standing about 4 feet or so, if you will, from the object in question. We have the plaster cast. We have the station point in eye level, and also the eye line in through here. And of course we have our distance, and he's at relatively a 1-point perspective viewpoint. And then you can begin to take your measurements and angles. So you have to stand back every time you do that. You have to have a marked place on the floor. Notice that. And then every time you take an angle, then you come back, you make that mark and angle downward, and then you come over, you move back over, you do the same thing. Now, if the object is greatly reduced or smaller and it's pushed farther back in the composition, it will make your drawing smaller, but you could probably stay in the same spot. He could move forward and you wouldn't have to continue to move backwards and forwards to make your drawing. Then you just stand there, take your measurements, and draw. But it makes it a lot smaller, because this object would be pushed theoretically back, let's say 3 to 5 feet. Might be easier for you to draw that. But whatever the size of the object in perspective or 1-to-1 is going to be the exact size that it's going to show up on your paper. The problem is when you get the object moved closer, it's harder to render that particular form because of your constant moving, and you have to move forward to draw while the object is actually behind you. So how do you work that out? So there are great limitations with this particular technique. And then those of you that are educators, you could use this in your class. I think it builds confidence with a certain type of student that might struggle a little bit more with three-dimensional kind of constructive drawing. I've seen students take fairly well to this, and it's fairly easy to set up. You can do a one-on-one kind of scenario. Again, like what this artist, what she's doing here is using this technique. And then once you establish your height here, and you do your measurements, right, you can bring that same measurement over to your paper, and then you can use this as a guide to render. You still need to be taught about light, the properties of light, value, how they work together, but they're different, making sure you understand edges, and then relative contrast, really, of all of these together, how those work, how contrast feed in to each one of these individually. And then we see let's go up, blow this up a little bit, we see another student here working with the bark plates and then using the bark plate here to help. Just notice how much analytical parts you have to work with here, instead of a nice smooth gesture, and then we're getting our volumetric thinking and our gesturing in, and then we're rendering. It takes more experience in the Renaissance technique to get your scale and proportion down. So in this sense, scale and proportion will be helped here. It's much slower with the bark plates, but ultimately I think the effect of construction Renaissance techniques is faster, it's more powerful, and you get to trust your artistic vision and your intuition and your internal scale and proportion once you begin to correct your mistakes over time. So it does take longer. I think this is a good way to introduce drawing again as an alternative or secondary method, I think, to Renaissance techniques that can give a certain type of student lots of confidence in drawing. Just realize that there are limitations to this, and if you can live with those, this is something that you might want to begin to look at. So Charles Bargue, the Charles Bargue plates, I don't remember how many there are, but they're quite a bit. You can buy it online through Amazon, and you can go through all the plates. There's hundreds of them, and if you go through them, I think you'll have a really good grasp on drawing as you begin to get yourself more skilled in the techniques and craft of drawing. And of course, this technique can be applied to painting as well. All right, there you go. You guys take care. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.